Series today, we just finished up God on the Movies, which I hope everybody enjoyed. Thanks to everybody who shared during that series. I thought it was just really high quality, some great movies, some great thoughts shared and insights, so thank you. We're going to start a series today on the miracles of Jesus. It's called The Meaning of Miracles, and we're going to look each week at a different miracle of Jesus. You know, lots of miracle stories in the Gospels. And we'll actually start with the first story next week. This week we're just going to sort of introduce the series a little bit, talk about this whole issue of miracles. Because I think there's some tensions there, right? There's we're in a tradition as followers of Jesus where we have a lot of miracle stories in the Bible. You know, Jesus did a lot of miracles. When we look at what he did, his followers did a lot of miracles actually in those early days. But that's somewhat divorced from our experience of everyday life, right? I mean, if you're anything like me, miracles aren't necessarily or don't seem to be a commonplace happening. So there's this tension, and I think we deal with that in different ways. We might have a certain amount of, we just ignore it. Maybe we just, don't want to think about it. And that's, if we're really honest about it, and today we're going to explore a little bit, hopefully honestly, kind of where are we at on numerous spectra of how we approach things like miracles and how we approach things like faith. And I think we kind of move around a bit, but probably most of us spend quite a lot of our time just sort of, I don't know what to make of that, so we just don't think about it or we ignore it. Or we might feel quite angry. Maybe we've wanted and prayed for miracles, around really difficult situations in our lives or other people's lives. It's not worked out, and we just kind of feel angry at God. It's just that's our sentiment. That's a strong emotion. I think we've probably all felt that at different times. Or maybe we feel shame. We blame ourselves. Maybe we don't experience that kind of life because we don't have as much faith, or we're backward in our faith in some way, or we just don't get it, or whatever it is. And we can beat ourselves up a little bit about it. Or maybe we're like, no, we've got to experience this. We have to experience the same things that Jesus experienced and the early church experienced. And so it becomes our quest, almost obsession even, to experience miraculous things. And that almost kind of takes over from everything else. And, again, maybe some of us have been there. I think I've been at that point in one part of my life too. And so it can cause a lot of stress and tension. So we're going to kind of explore that a little bit today, and then we'll sort of dip into some of these challenges each week as we look at different stories. What I want to say though right at the beginning is you've probably noticed it's somewhat warm in here, right? And last week I think I promised that we'd have fixed the AC, so I lied. I'm sorry, it wasn't intentional. But our AC in this auditorium is broken. It's going to take us about 4 to 5 weeks to fix it, and here's the reason why. We could pray for a miracle on this one, right? But the unit is so large that they have to custom build it. It has to be ordered. So we're trying to push as fast as we can, but it's going to take a while to get that sorted out. Now, to put temporary AC in, we actually haven't found out a foolproof way of doing that, but it would cost us well over $1,000 a week for this hour and a half service. So the Board of Trustees have carefully made the decision not to do that. We're putting fans on, if that is problematic to you, please come and chat with me afterwards. But we feel like we can get through these next few weeks. Now, water stations like last week, and we also have ice pop stations. So if you see where it says Popsicles. Now actually, could somebody bring me a popsicle? Actually, anybody would be kind enough to bring me a popsicle? Because they're kind of cheap, to be honest. Lots of E numbers in them. But any old one will do. Thank you. Just one. Yeah, just one. That's great. But in the spirit of miracles, I have a box here full of, this just got ice in it, like that. So I want to pop this icicle in there, popsicle in there, shake it up a little bit. Right, let's see what we've got here. And it's magically turned into Haagen-Dazs ice cream there. So if you would like one of these, there you go. I don't know if anybody wants one at the back there. I'm going to try and get this one a little further at the back. So I just wanted to show that we're not complete cheapskates. Or I went out and bought those popsicles, and I've had a few complaints already. So But we are going to sort of try and keep cool. So if that's a problem, please do come and see me afterwards. I think that it's in our interest to save a bit of money. Oh, do you want, is that guy allowed one? They've got nuts in them, by the way, so I think there's one. Yeah, there's one more. And anybody want the popsicle, actually? You can have that one. I'll throw it out there and somebody can be kind and maybe pass it on. Now obviously miracles, I'm joking there, I'm not trying to be sacrilegious, but Jesus' miracles were more than magic tricks, right? They were deep, meaningful encounters with real life people. And in fact, when we think about these stories, we're going to look at, over the next few weeks, at the fact that they are stories, right? What we have are stories, and the way we're being told those stories is really important. We're going to look at that. So it's not just the miracle itself, we're certainly not going to ignore that, but it's the fact about how we're told the miracle happens. Let me give you an example here. So we're going to look at one very quick miracle. It's the first miracle Jesus does in the book of Mark, which was probably the earliest gospel. It says, a man with leprosy came to him and begged him on his knees, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Jesus was indignant. It's kind of interesting. He almost sounds angry. He reached out his hand and touched the man. I am willing, he said, be clean. Immediately the leprosy left him and he was cleansed. Jesus sent him away at once with a strong warning. See that you don't tell this to anyone, but go show yourself to the priest and offer the sacrifices that Moses commanded, etc., etc., etc. So a couple of things there. One is this is not a magic show like Jesus is saying, hey, quick trick, and then go tell everybody, I'm the business. It's not about that at all. But also what we see here, there's kind of two perspectives really on this miracle. One is, the leper got healed. That's miraculous, that's incredible. But there's also Jesus touching the leper, right? That is perhaps also miraculous. That we're told this story in a certain way where Jesus is breaking a taboo. He's crossing a boundary. And every time we're told a miracle story, there are always these other dynamics there. The feeding of the 5,000 is a great example of that. It's told in a way that makes us see Jesus as Moses, like Moses feeding people in the desert. There's other meaning to these stories. So we want to look at these stories in a very holistic kind of way. Now, I want to say we're not going to take, and especially today, just an intellectual exploration of miracles. Do miracles really happen? What's the nature of reality? What's it all about? Rather, hopefully, we're going to be very personal about it. Okay, because as I said, these stories are very personal, and I wanted to just share a little bit from my own personal experience and how perhaps I'm approaching this series. I'll say up front, for one thing, I'm a little nervous. Right? I'm a little nervous to talk about things like miracles, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One is, do you believe in miracles is the kind of question I get asked a lot by people who come to our church, or just people in general who find out that I do what I do for a living. And sometimes that question is not really a question, it's a test, right? Have you ever had that, where people say, do you believe this or do you believe that? And they're not really asking the question, they're trying to say, I'm a little bit worried that you're on the slippery slope of liberalism and you're sort of heading down some horrible trail, and I want to just sort of catch you out here. I want to find out where you are and maybe even correct you. And so, as I talk about these issues and I want to take a very honest approach to them, I'll be honest, I'm a little bit nervous about that because I don't want to offend anybody. The second thing is, I also get asked that question a lot, not because somebody's trying to catch me out, but because we're desperate for miracles, right? We all have all kinds of things going on in our lives where it feels like just normal life isn't cutting it, and we need some kind of divine intervention or some kind of hope, something beyond ourselves. And I feel huge compassion in those situations, and I wrestle with the tension of the fact that, for instance, when it comes to praying for people for healing, that's a common miracle of Jesus in the Bible. That my track record is not that good. And I have prayed for people. I pray for a lot of people, and I continue to pray for a lot of people. And some people, we'll talk about this in a bit, have been healed, based on my own understanding. But most have not. And there's that tension again of like, what's that about? And I don't want to raise people's expectations and say, just oh, it's fine, just trust God. Maybe that's setting people up for disappointment, right? So I'm just being honest and real about this, and maybe you share some of those anxieties too. And that's okay. We're going to bring our whole selves into this little journey we're going to be on over the next few weeks around these miracles. So, but also I wanted to share a little bit about my own story. So I grew up in a tradition that very much believed in and sought to experience what we would call perhaps supernatural or paranormal or miraculous things. I was part of the Vineyard movement. I was a pastor in a Vineyard church for over 10 years before coming here. And the founder of that movement, John Wimber, I think we've got a little picture of him. He in the 60s, he was the producer for the Righteous Brothers, you know, the band the Righteous Brothers. And he kind of lived a pretty rock and roll lifestyle, pretty decadent lifestyle, became a Christian, and kind of, he was an all or nothing kind of guy. And he kind of, you know, sold everything he had and just said, I'm going to follow Jesus now. And you know, it was sort of that time, it seems like, you know, revolutionary time where people went through lots of changes. And he thought, I better go to church. He went to a local Quaker church out in California. And he sat in the service, and they read from the Bible, and they did, you know, it wasn't just a purely silence Quaker church. They did some talking and some, you know, like, probably not dissimilar to this. And then at the end of it, he said, well, when did the miracles happen? Because he had read the Gospels, and he was like, you know, what? And they said, that, you know, yeah, we don't do that here. That's not, that doesn't really happen anymore. And he was completely, he felt completely let down. Felt like, I've given up everything, and you mean it's like that was just then, or it's just pretend, or whatever it is. And so he kind of went on this quest of praying for people for healing, and you know, he went on this journey which resulted actually in some pretty amazing things happen, and a whole church movement eventually starting that he led. He's dead now. You know, he got cancer and died. Right, so there's, you know, he prayed for many people that seem apparently to have been very genuinely healed, but he himself died of cancer. You know, there's some more of that tension, there's some more of that irony. But I was part of that movement, and you know, saw some really amazing things. Saw what seemed to be some quite, I would describe miraculous things. Experienced some of those myself. Also saw some excesses where people become sort of obsessed. It's like, we have to have miracles, we have to have supernatural things happening, otherwise our faith isn't legit, and it becomes this sort of almost forced, pressured thing, which becomes pretty toxic quickly. It overall, just you know, a very beautiful experience. I come from that background. I want you to know that. I also come from a background where I used to be a medical doctor, so I'm thinking quite rationally about the material world and life and how things work and what's real. I mean, I don't want to ignore facts. I don't want to, you know, I'm so in that sense, you know, that can sometimes feel almost at odds perhaps to some people with some of my own spiritual experience. So that's a little bit of me, and as I say, I want us perhaps, you know, all of us in this series to kind of bring ourselves to this. We all come with different perspectives, different hopes, fears, doubts. I have all kinds of doubts, all kinds of tensions. I'm going to share some of those as we wrestle with these issues, right? Now, what I want to do before going on any further is just show you a couple of video clips. Actually, you know, I said earlier, God in the Movies is over, but I'm going to show you a clip from a movie, and it's actually the first movie that we did in this last series of God in the Movies. Who can remember what that movie is? Dr. Strange. Yes, who did that? Who presented that? The Mathers, yeah. And what were their three main points? Oh, no, okay. You know, I know you'll have forgotten my three main points by lunchtime, so then the chances of you remembering theirs, you know, that's not fair. But I don't really remember. Tinika showed us a clip of the Ancient One, or Dr. Strange meeting the Ancient One for the first time. We're going to look at a slightly abbreviated version of that clip. So let's run the clip. I'm showing that clip because that presents us one way of looking at reality, right? And it's about healing. It's about how people are healed. It's about the fact that there's a material world and there's a spiritual world. We'll come back to that in a second. I'm going to show you another clip now. And this is from a show, you can watch this show on Netflix, it's called Miracles. It's by a guy called Derren Brown. Has anybody ever listened to, read, or heard Derren Brown? He's a very little-known English guy, obviously. Really great guy, though, actually. He would describe himself as an atheist. I don't think he's not spiritual, though, personally. He's a kind of mentalist, illusionist, conjurer, psychologist. He actually used to be a Christian, but his path has taken him in a different direction. And he believes there are completely material or materialistic ways to describe the universe, in only materialistic terms. And he had a show, and that last clip I showed you, in some sense we might feel somewhat comfortable with that because it's religious, it feels spiritual, although we might feel uncomfortable with it because it's kind of different religion to us. It's very Eastern oriented, that clip. Well, this clip might feel equally uncomfortable, but for other reasons. It comes at the end of a show where he has demonstrated how a lot of the ways that faith healers produce a perceived result in people is actually to do with hypnotic effects and mindsets, and it's kind of a bit, he would say, a con. Now, I would say that not every faith healer or anybody, not everybody praying for healing is trying to con people. I mean, there's most people, I think, are unknown and trying to be very genuine. We all know that there are con people out there, right? So I think his sort of the way he's approaching it is a little bit one-sided. But I want to show you the end of his show. It's a live show in London, and he kind of brings a different perspective, I think, to this whole issue of miracles. So he actually brings people up on stage, and they experience, people with pain experience loss of that pain. People with poor eyesight could see better again. And his perspective is that it's all a mindset, right? But he doesn't believe that's a God thing. He doesn't believe that's a spiritual thing. He believes the world is, the universe is material and material only. And that's a very different perspective from the clip in the first one. Now, I'm not saying that's the only two ways of looking at the universe, right? But they represent two different approaches. But I think in some ways they're quite similar, because both, I don't know whether you got a sense of this, but I think there's a spiritual nature to both of those. There's a sense of awe about both of them. I mean, in the latter clip, there's this sense of the world, history is beautiful, it's precious, there's a sense of awe about that. And they both emphasize this sense of perspective, right? How do we look at things? So the ancient one talks about looking through a keyhole, and we're looking at reality through a keyhole, and we have opportunities to widen that keyhole, and we take them or we leave them. And Darren Brown is saying, if we think we're going to get healed, if we have positive thoughts about things, we experience something. What we experience is different. Our mindset is very different. That's not dissimilar to what Jesus talked about. We'll come to that in a second. So maybe these two worldviews aren't necessarily all that different. Again, I think we kind of move, if we're really honest about it, in and out of different perspectives along the lines of what we just saw. The materialist worldview, the worldview that, in other words, there's only stuff, there's only matter, there's no spiritual dimension. Everything that happens in the world that could be described as a miracle really has a very natural materialistic explanation. I think, functionally, many of us live there on a day-to-day basis, right? Either out of, we just don't want, going back to what we said at the beginning, we don't want to really have to deal with the tension of the miraculous when we read about it in Scripture, or because we're just desperately disappointed that things haven't worked out, so we kind of live like functional materialists. Or maybe we believe in a spiritual dimension. We kind of give, we have give some mental assent to the fact that, well, there's the material world and there's the spiritual world, but we might functionally be what we call deists. In other words, well, yeah, there's a God, but really that God does not intervene in the world very much. It's kind of like, there's a God, but we don't really know where she is, kind of thing. Actually, a lot of the founding fathers were deists. So there's a sort of a general belief in God, but no kind of intervention. I think that might be where we live sometimes, right? We don't want to give up our faith completely, but in terms of engagement with God and the spiritual realm, it's not our reality. It's not what we experience. Or we might be what are called theists. This is another spiritual perspective where, there's a material world and a spiritual world, and God really does intervene in that spiritual world. It's just that it's hard to predict. It can seem a little bit hit and miss, but we experience times where it feels like, I feel like that was an intervention. I feel that was God, and that kind of fires us up for a bit. But then very often again we kind of it can feel like a drought of intervention, and we become discouraged, and and maybe we lapse back into deism or even into materialism. Okay, and so those aren't exhaustive descriptions of where we might be, but I think they might be our reality at different times. I think we move in and out of those. All of us probably move in and out of those at different times. I certainly do, and have done. I'll be honest with you, there are times where I doubt the existence of God. Does anybody ever doubt that? Oh, come on. That's real. For me, if there's no doubt, then really there's no faith, right? Nothing. If there's no doubt, then you don't require faith for anything. So doubt and faith go hand in hand. So these are challenging issues. Now I want to present perhaps a different way of looking at reality. One I've talked about before here. That may be one that we could sort of change our lens a little bit and take this lens and look at some of these stories we're going to look at over the next few weeks through this different kind of lens. And that is, for want of a better term, a non-dual, D-U-A-L, a non-dual way of looking at life. Non-dual consciousness is a term that a lot of people use these days. In other words, maybe it's not that there's only a material world or only a spiritual world. Some people believe that the material world is just a figment of our imagination. We didn't go there this morning, but and maybe not that there's a material world and a separate spiritual world, two separate things, but maybe all of life is one. Our reality is one. The material world and the spiritual world are all part of one reality, or what we call the material world and what we call the spiritual world. And miracles are just a sign to us, and I think that's a biblical perspective, that miracles are signs and wonders. They're a sign to us that there's more to life than meets the eye. Our experience is essentially of the material world, right? We see things, taste things, touch things, build things, feel things. Our experience is primarily material. But miracles and this other dimension kind of point us to the fact that maybe we don't see everything as it is. And I think we kind of know that that's true. We've talked before about the electromagnetic spectrum, right? We see only a certain bandwidth of the electromagnetic spectrum, the visible one. There's a slide of that, I think I can go up. So there's a whole load of, do we have that slide? So in other words, in terms of what we see, it's very narrow, right? We know that. That's not up for debate. We know that there's a whole reality out there that we don't see, right? And that reality there is kind of, that's part of the material reality for sure. But I think that intuitively leads us to know that there's more to life than meets the eye. Same when we think about dark energy and dark matter. Like, there's so much about the universe that we don't perceive. We don't even see it. We just know it has to be there to make sense of everything else. We can't even measure it really, but clever people like me make an attempt at that. So I think intuitively we know there's more to life than meets the eye, and I think that's a guide to us perhaps that the miraculous is perhaps an indication, a pointer to opening our minds, to perhaps widening the keyhole to a deeper understanding of reality, not just superstition. Or not just scientific understanding, okay? Which might be on two ends of the spectrum, but to actually a whole new way of thinking, a whole new way of seeing, a whole new way of believing about everything. And I think that's really the approach that Jesus took. I think that's what Jesus came, when Jesus said repent, for instance, I think he's saying change your mind, see a different kind of reality. And he lived in that reality. He just operated in that reality. I think that does a couple of things, right? It shows us, if we think of life that way, it shows us that the laws of gravity, also the laws of nature, like gravity, are really important and beautiful. Like, it's not like miracles are not some intervention from another world to change the natural laws. Right? So, I think that almost feels like cheating to me. It feels like, so life goes on, and then really miracles are just sort of some outside intervention which changes everything for a moment, and then we go back to normal again. We are dependent on natural laws, right? The fact that we have gravity is a really good thing. It means we haven't exploded while we're sat here. It means we haven't just sort of, just start floating out randomly into space. Gravity is a beautiful thing. And in Matthew 3, when Jesus is tempted by the devil, in that story, takes Jesus up to the top of the temple and says, throw yourself off the temple. Jesus says, don't put the Lord your God to the test. What he really means is, I know about gravity. You know, there's a law which means if I jump on this, I'm going to hit the deck very quickly and I could die. I mean, it's like, so there are consequences to the laws. And he's actually, I think, in that moment saying, I'm not going to ask God to jump in and intervene and change those laws temporarily just for my sake. But then Jesus at the same time seems to operate in this higher, bigger dimension where he's not begging God to come and do something, right? Do you notice that as we go through these stories, you'll notice it's Jesus doesn't heal people, for instance, by going, God, please heal this person, please. Oh, let's try a different technique. Please heal this person. God, please heal this person. Jesus is just healing people. Jesus is just operating like, oh, this is normal. Jesus is operating in a different way than my experience or my reality. I think what that does actually is it takes the pressure off a bit, okay? I mean, we still long for what we might call perhaps divine interventions. We still long for perhaps what we might call miraculous or supernatural things to happen, although I think with this worldview, supernatural becomes a meaningless term, really. It's all natural, it's all reality. We still long for those things, but what I think we do is, with a more dualistic approach, where it's like we're kind of pleading with God to intervene, is we really set God up for failure, right? Because if God is a person who can control all these outcomes, and we're asking God to do that, and God doesn't do it, then God's pretty mean. I mean, pretty unkind. Or we're just not good enough. We're not doing it right, or we're not pleasing God enough, and so we could be put pressure on ourselves, be negative about ourselves. I think looking at it in this different way means, okay, perhaps what we need to do is grow as human beings, as the human race, in how we look at reality and how we operate within reality, and recognize how far we have come as well. You think about the last 2,000 years of history, and sort of what would have been called a miracle 2,000 years ago seems quite commonplace for us today. I mean, penicillin, for instance, right? If Jesus had started healing people with pneumonia by saying, hey, take this little bit of thing here, I mean, it would have been a miracle. Whereas now we understand it, it's thinking, oh no, that's not really a miracle. We're so familiar with it, but in a sense it is a miracle, right? It's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. The universe is incredible. Darren Brown's description of you and me, it's incredible. It's wonderful. It's all wonderful, right? So what we're going to try and do over this series is sort of take a different kind of perspective, maybe put on some different lenses to how Jesus operates and how we might be invited into that journey ourselves. Just to wrap up, I want to throw out 5 challenges. And by the way, we have discussion questions, right? Which I'll put these, I've got them here, I'll put them out on the welcome just outside. So if you're meeting in your groups this week, we have groups that people meet in during the week time. So if you want to be part of a group, come and see me afterwards, or come join us at Cedar in 7 minutes at the back there. But we have discussion questions for this week to chat and sort of talk about some of these issues and your own perspective on this, and wrestle with some of the things that I've been sharing this morning. But here's 5 challenges I think that we can all take out of this. First one is this: celebrate all of life as a miracle. You are the miracle. Okay, so we tend to celebrate or look for the things that seem miraculous, like interventions, what we might call interventions. But there's just so much about life that is miraculous and incredible, and let's celebrate all of that. Like, for instance, photosynthesis. That, for millions, billions of years, that photosynthesis or photosynthetic reaction has been going on kind of faultlessly in plants, time and time and time again, producing food, producing oxygen. I mean, that's absolutely incredible. I mean, the way all that happens. Krebs cycle. We're all sat here right now, oxidizing sugars to produce energy, and that complex cycle is happening miraculously, most of the time, faultlessly, time and time and time again, so that we can just live and breathe and have our being. That, to me, is a miracle. Einstein famously said, we got the good old quote, which he may not have actually said. This is one of those great quotes that's assigned to somebody, but it may not have been them. But let's assume he did. There are only 2 ways to live your life: as though nothing is a miracle, which might be the sort of materialist view, or as though everything is a miracle, right? So let's celebrate everything. Challenge number 2. Grow into a new reality. Break the door down. What I mean by this is that the ancient one was all about opening the keyhole. I think Jesus came to break the door down and show us a completely new reality. Not just, I'm going to open up a little bit more. There's a great, going back to Mark, right at the beginning of Mark, there's a great description. At that time, Jesus came from Nazareth in Galilee and was baptized by John in the Jordan. Just as Jesus was coming up out of the water, he saw heaven being torn open and the Spirit descending on him like a dove. That expression, the heavens torn open, it's like breaking down these barriers. Now you could view that in a dualistic way. Oh, well, there's heaven up there and earth down here. Or it's just a metaphorical way of saying Jesus is breaking down these barriers. Jesus is opening up the keyhole. Jesus is knocking the door down. Jesus is showing us that we can live in a new reality. Paul described this reality as new creation. Again, I think that's a metaphor. In 2 Corinthians, he's saying, if anyone's in Christ, the new creation has come. The old is gone, the new is here. Okay, so let's lean into the possibility that there's more to this life than we realize. Then there's more to this life than perhaps we have yet experienced. Let's break the door down. Let's be new creation. Let's go back to the challenges. Give up trying to control outcomes. So much, I think, of our desire for miracles or intervention is really because we want a certain outcome. And that can lead to disappointment. It can also lead to kind of, unhealthy control. If we think we can control things, control outcomes, especially around miraculous type things, then I think we get showman and we get manipulation and we get, send me a check for $150 and you'll get your healing kind of things, right? Feel free to do that, by the way, if you want to do. No, but it's the sort of seedy side of all this, which just feels like, I don't want to go there. I look at Jesus. Jesus is operating in this dimension a dimension that I don't experience yet, right? Healing people and just, reorganizing matter in some kind of way. But we also read this about Jesus when he's about to go to his death. They went to a place called Gethsemane, and Jesus said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." He took Peter, James, and John along with him, and he began to be deeply distressed and troubled. "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death," he said to them. "Stay here and keep watch." The anguish here, the angst here is almost palpable. Going a little further, he fell to the ground and prayed that if possible, the hour might pass from him. "Abba," which is Aramaic for Father. "Abba, Father," he said, "everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will." So there's this sense of Jesus that Jesus is operating in another dimension, not for his own benefit, not to control outcomes necessarily. He's bringing life to people. But this isn't about him. He recognizes that there's perhaps something bigger. There's a bigger story. There's more to life than meets the eye. And in this moment, he's not trying to control it. He's surrendering. And perhaps, as we grow in our interaction with God and the way that we pray, we become less about asking for this, that, and the other, and more about, I want to be one with God. I want to be one with the divine will, the divine purpose. It's not about me getting what I want necessarily. I think that's a huge challenge for us. And again, I think with control, it nearly always leads to abuse and nearly always leads to disappointment as well. And then let's remain open rather than cynical. I think we could go into the series, go into life with that sort of, I don't know whether all this, it's all a bit weird. I'm not sure whether this is very real. Do we have that start there? But let's remain open. And there's a scripture for that. I think a great illustration of this is the fact that, actually we don't even need to look at that one, but Jesus, in Matthew 13, it talks about the fact that Jesus went to his hometown in Nazareth. And they were like, "Who the heck are you?" Which does that happen to you when you go home? But they were like, you think you're a bit of a star because you've got this followership going, and you've done some miracles and that kind of thing. And it says that he didn't do many miracles there, or he couldn't do many miracles there because of their lack of faith. Now, some of that I think has been misinterpreted as, the reason you don't experience this fuller dimension of life is because you just don't have enough faith. I don't think that's the case at all. But we did see in those 2 video clips that your perspective, your sense of openness, really affects outcomes, right? We don't get to control outcomes, but outcomes seem to be determined by outlook, right? And that seems to be true in the case of Jesus. It's not like Jesus was just doing whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted. We have to engage. We have to be vulnerable and connect. And then finally, let's keep a collective perspective. And what I mean by this, and I want to go back to the miracle. I think we will talk about this in the final week, actually. The feeding of the 5,000, right? Classic, famous Jesus miracle. What is the miracle there, really? Is it that Jesus did a magic trick like I did with the ice pot? And it's like a few loaves and fish, and he takes it and he puts it behind a curtain and suddenly it's, and then he hands it out. I mean, I don't think that's necessarily what the story's about. Maybe the miracle is the kid who says, oh, you can have my lunch, right? I mean, talk about outlook, talk about lack of cynicism there. Maybe that's the miracle. Maybe the miracle is 5,000 people, and we're talking a lot more than that because they tended to only count adult males in those days. I don't know why. Why did we ever just have that mentality? Anyway, so it's probably a lot more people than 5,000. Maybe it's the miracle that 10,000 or so people came together and shared. And that sort of leads us to this whole thing of like miracles. We tend to have an approach to miracles that's very individualistic. Like, I need this miracle, or that person needs that miracle. And that's very personal and very real. But do you know what would be I have a bit of a cold at the moment. Been feeling not so well this week. A healing miracle, I'd take it. I'd absolutely take it. That'd be wonderful. But if it was between that and let's sort the problem out on our southern border in a really just, ethical, and good way, I think that supersedes it, right? I think that's a bigger issue. Reconciliation between races and genders and countries and the kind of miracles that I think Jesus might have been alluding to when he said these famous words in John's Gospel, and there's 7, beautifully described miracles in John. He says, very truly I tell you, whoever believes in me will do the works I have been doing, and they will do even greater things than these. No pressure. Because I am going to the Father, and I will do whatever you ask in my name so that the Father may be glorified in the Son. You may ask me for anything in my name, and I will do it. Now, I think that has very personal implications, but I think Jesus here is talking about what Paul was getting at about new creation, a whole new humanity, a whole new way of life, healing and reconciliation at a corporate, collective, societal level. Those are the miracles that we should be praying for and striving for and never giving up on and not being cynical about, as well. So there's 5 challenges. I've listed those out in the discussion questions. Grab a copy and think about them, wrestle with them. We're just going to take a moment here as we move into communion just to open our hearts, right? And we're going to sing a song. The music team are going to sing a song for us. And maybe we could just put those words up, Jeff. Very simple. It's got almost like a chant. And it just says, here I am, Lord. All I am, Lord. Here I am, Lord. I am yours, right? And I just wonder, maybe we could just stand to sing this. We're going to take communion, in the usual way. You can come and take bread or crackers and fruit juice at the front, or be served at the sides. You can serve one another at the table in the middle. We'll have people at the back who would love to pray with you. So if you've got something that you specifically want prayer for, please don't leave here without asking for that. But what we're going to do here, we're just going to open our hearts. We're going to perhaps widen the keyhole with an expectation maybe some doors might get broken down. And we're going to be vulnerable. This whole sense of here I am. Okay, we're not demanding anything. We're not controlling outcomes. It's just here I am, right? And then we're saying I am yours. So we're sort of, whatever our perspective on God, we might have a very personal perspective on God. Here I am, God. Or we might have a less of a personal perspective, and it's like the divine presence. Well, I'm one with the divine presence, and we're just presenting ourselves. So we're going to sing this several times, and I just encourage you, open your heart, and there may be something that you feel like, oh, I could really do with healing or reconciliation or change in this situation, and just offer it out there without any demand or expectation of it's got to be this way. Just be open, and let's kind of lean into the fact that there's more to life than meets the eye. Let's sing this song together.